Welcome back to Hope is Kindled, the podcast where we explore how great works of literature illuminate the human spirit. Today's episode brings us to the dusty plains of La Mancha, where an aging gentleman dons a barber's basin for a helmet, mounts a bony steed named Rocinante, and sets out to restore chivalry to the world. Yes, today we travel with Don Quixote, the mad knight, the dreamer, the fool, and perhaps the most noble character in all of literature. Let me begin by saying, Don Quixote is one of the most important books in this podcast. Why? Because there's so much wisdom packed into its pages that I consider it one of the most invaluable works of art in human history. It is funny, tragic, ridiculous, profound. It makes you laugh, and then catches you mid-laugh with something heartbreaking or startlingly wise. But before we ride out alongside the Mad Knight of La Mancha, it's worth pausing to understand the man who imagined him, a soldier, a captive, a tax collector, and a dreamer whose life was every bit as turbulent, compelling as the tale he told. Miguel de Cervantes was born in 1547, and as we just said, his life was as chaotic and noble as his most famous creation. He fought in the Battle of Lepanto, was captured by pirates, spent years in captivity in Algiers, and suffered poverty and imprisonment. Yet from this turmoil, he gave us the world's first modern novel. Don Quixote, published in two parts, 1605 and 1615, broke from the tradition of linear storytelling and one-dimensional characters. It invented something new. A story where the narrator questions reality, the characters know they're in a story, and the protagonist's delusions often feel more real than the real world around him. This is more than satire. It is a mirror. What is a knight-errant? To understand Don Quixote, we must first understand the concept of a knight-errant. In medieval chivalric romance literature, a knight-errant is a wandering knight who travels the land in search of adventures to prove his chivalric virtues, often engaging in duels or quests inspired by courtly love. The term errant comes from the Latin iterere, meaning to travel. These knights were characterized by their pursuit of noble deeds, often acting independently of a lord or king, driven by personal honor and the desire to right wrongs. Don Quixote, inspired by the chivalric romances he obsessively reads, decides to become a knight-errant himself. He dons an old suit of armor, renames himself Don Quixote de la Mancha, and sets out to revive chivalry and protect the helpless. His adventures are fueled by his imagination and a deep-seated belief in the ideals of knighthood, despite living in a world that no longer adheres to those values. One of the most memorable scenes in the novel is a simple, earthy moment. Sancho Panza, Don Quixote's faithful squire, is standing next to Rocinante and suddenly must relieve himself. He tells Don Quixote, who recoils with chivalric outrage. And Sancho replies, somewhat sheepishly but unapologetically, "It's hilarious, and it's perfect, because Cervantes gives us not just a knight-errant, but a flesh-and-blood fool, trying to live by impossible ideals in a world where bodily functions still exist." That's the beauty of this novel. The sublime and the ridiculous, together. And when Don Quixote says, "Thou hast seen nothing yet," it is both a warning and a promise. It speaks to the escalating madness of Don Quixote's journey, but it also hints at the wonders still to come. Cervantes invites us not just to laugh at Quixote, but to follow him, to imagine boldly, to trust that even in failure, there is transformation. Cervantes dares us to follow Quixote, not to mock him, but to understand him, to feel what he feels, to see, even briefly, the world not just as it is, but as it could be. And it's in that space, between disillusionment and dreaming, that we arrive at one of Cervantes' most unforgettable reflections.
When life itself seems lunatic, who knows where madness lies? Perhaps to be too practical is madness. To surrender dreams, this may be madness. Too much sanity may be madness, and maddest of all, to see life as it is, and not as it should be.
Cervantes throws down the gauntlet, not just for knights errant, but for all of us who dare to hope when reason tells us not to. For all those non-believers, quitters, and naysayers who tried to stifle or stop others in the pursuit of their dreams, Cervantes offers a mirror to our own dreams. Are we too practical? Have we abandoned wonder for realism? The novel asks us to hold on to our ideals, even if they make us look ridiculous. Especially if they make us look ridiculous. It also teaches us to endure.
He who's down one day can be up the next, unless he really wants to stay in bed.
Telling us that dignity and resilience are choices. This line from Don Quixote is deceptively light, almost humorous in tone, but within it lies one of the most profound truths about human endurance. It acknowledges suffering without romanticizing it. Some days, we fall, we grieve, we lose our footing entirely. But Cervantes reminds us that rising again is passable if we choose it. The quote doesn't deny the weight of despair, it simply insists that we're not defined by it. We have agency. The will to get up, to try again, is the quiet heroism behind every great journey. It's what keeps Dantes digging through prison stone in The Count of Monte Cristo. It's what allows Chief Bromden in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest to rise in silence and reclaim his voice. It's what holds Odysseus to the mast through every storm. Endurance isn't about feeling strong, it's about showing up even when you don't. And Cervantes knew that better than most, that the first victory is simply refusing to stay in bed. That's the heartbeat of hope. Don Quixote was written during the Spanish Golden Age, a period of flourishing arts and literature in Spain. However, it was also a time of significant social and political upheaval, including the decline of the Spanish Empire and the rigid enforcement of orthodoxy through the Inquisition. Cervantes' novel reflects these tensions, satirizing the outdated ideals of chivalry and questioning the nature of reality and truth. Literary critics have long debated the novel's meaning. Some view it as a straightforward parody of chivalric romances, while others see it as a profound exploration of human psychology and the conflict between idealism and realism. The character of Don Quixote has been interpreted as both a fool and a hero, embodying the complexities of the human condition. From a psychological lens, Don Quixote's delusion can be read as a coping mechanism, a way of navigating a world that no longer holds space for honor or idealism. Some scholars even see him as a man grieving the loss of meaning in his life, creating a fantasy to give his days purpose. Literary critic Harold Bloom saw the character as the origin of the modern self because Quixote's inner world doesn't match his outer one, but he insists on living by it anyway. As readers, we are both Sancho, rolling our eyes, and also Quixote, wishing we too could fight dragons, win glory, and live by a code of love and justice. And as Cervantes writes,
"All I know is that while I'm asleep, I'm never afraid, bless the man who invented sleep, a cloak over all human thought and, finally, universal currency with which all things can be bought, the shepherd and the king, the fool and the wise, to the same level."
This is the democratization of suffering and dreaming. We're left to ask, is Don Quixote mad? Or are we? For giving up our dreams so easily? Let's not miss the life lessons here. Don Quixote is, by all appearances, a fool, but he's a fool who tries. Who persists, who falls and rises again, armed not with power, but with faith in goodness and the possibility of change. Cervantes knew that the world could be murky, full of delusions, deceptions, and tangled perceptions. But he also knew that truth, no matter how obscured, has an uncanny way of resurfacing. In one of the novel's most quietly profound lines, he writes,
"The truth may be stretched thin, but it never breaks, and it always surfaces above lies as oil floats on water."
This is not just a metaphor, it's a law of nature. And it's a law I believe Richard Feynman might have appreciated. For Feynman, truth was not something handed down. It was something uncovered, tested, earned. And though his universe was built of atoms rather than windmills, he too believed in a reality that resisted distortion. Like Cervantes, Feynman placed his faith in curiosity, in perseverance, and in the patient rise of truth. I hope to read in the future that Feynman enjoyed Cervantes and smiled at Quixote's madness, but he would have marveled at his method. I like to believe Feynman, like we do, would have admired Don Quixote for not letting go of the idea just because everyone else laughs. In science, if the data shows you it's a windmill, you've got to admit it, that's the truth. But the spirit of Quixote? That relentless curiosity, that insistence on pursuing meaning even when it's not obvious, is truly miraculous. Hope isn't pretending the facts aren't real. Hope is continuing to look, to ask, to wonder even when you're told the answer's already been decided. The truth has to be discovered, not declared, and sometimes you only find it by charging forward, even if you look ridiculous doing it. That's the beautiful part of being human. We get to ask questions that have no easy answers. We get to dream. The tragedy of Don Quixote isn't that he's wrong. It's that he's alone in his pursuit of something bigger than himself, of honor, of courage, of a better world. That's what makes him noble. That's what makes him worth reading about. In a world obsessed with cynicism, this novel teaches us that belief, even if flawed, is better than apathy. Cervantes doesn't shy away from cruelty or hypocrisy. Like Dostoevsky, he saw the world as it was, but chose to reach for what it could be. Don Quixote has inspired generations, from Shakespeare and Melville to Faulkner and Borges, from Picasso's drawings to Broadway's Man of La Mancha. That show's anthem, The Impossible Dream, could have been written by Cervantes himself. Don Quixote isn't alone in his noble madness. Tease at the heart of stories like The Shawshank Redemption, where hope becomes a quiet act of rebellion against despair. In The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon makes a reference to Don Quixote while justifying his constant need to correct others. Sheldon claims he's not being malicious, he's raising them up. When Penny sarcastically comments on how much he seems to enjoy it, Sheldon, with his usual deadpan literalism, responds, "Or, Don Quixote is a book about a donkey named Hotai." It's a quintessential Sheldon moment, part faux misunderstanding, part pointed intellectual jab, but it also mirrors one of Don Quixote's core themes. Just as the Mad Knight charges windmills believing them to be giants, Sheldon tilts at errors in logic and speech with the same unwavering conviction. Both characters are propelled by their personal quest for meaning, truth, and honor, no matter how ridiculous they may appear. In this light, Sheldon becomes a modern-day Quixote, armed not with a lance, but with encyclopedic knowledge and relentless pedantry, reminding us that even comic absurdity can stem from a deeply human longing to make sense of the world, and the spirit of Cervantes pulses just as strongly throughout the literary world and the ages, particularly Hamlet, Gatsby, even Holden Caulfield, all grapple with a reality that doesn't align with their ideals. They all crash against the rocks of a world too brutal for dreams, but none do so with as much humor, heart, and humanity as Quixote. Like Don Quixote, even the Doctor often sees a world others don't, one worth saving, even when it's cruel or broken. Both characters act on principles that seem outdated or naive: justice, honor, peace, wonder. Both wander, often alone, misunderstood or dismissed as mad. But they keep going. "I am and always will be the optimist," the Doctor says. Isn't that Quixote in a nutshell? The Doctor even goes so far as to proclaim himself a madman in a box, and, as much as we love Rosinante, he is not be a gallant warhorse just as the TARDIS is an old blue box. But both are beloved companions, bigger on the inside, and symbols of hope. We all understand the weight and risk of hope, that fragile, stubborn force that can either sustain us or undo us. In the episode entitled The Rings of Akhaten, where the 11th Doctor confronts a being that feeds on memory and belief. In both, we witness characters confronting overwhelming darkness with nothing but their own sense of wonder and will. These moments caution us about the pain help con Kari, but more importantly, they remind us of its power. Like Don Quixote, they teach us that imagination isn't an escape for reality, it's a way of shaping it. Don Quixote may mistake windmills for giants, but it's because he wants to fight evil. The Doctor may face creatures across time and space, but he does so because he believes that people are worth saving. Is the Doctor a knight-errant as well? Yes, in the most poetic, unconventional, and timey-wimey sense imaginable, the Doctor is absolutely a knight-errant. Ultimately, the line between madness and insight is where Don Quixote meets other transformative figures, like Mick Murphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or Chief Bromden, who sees the world as a machine called the Combine. These are characters who suffer for seeing differently, yet who wake others up in the process. Cervantes himself writes,
Virtue is persecuted by the wicked more than it is loved by the good.
This line could just as easily have been written with Chief Bromden in mind. In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Bromden silently watches as Mick Murphy's integrity, rebellion, and compassion are slowly crushed by the machinery of institutional control, the very combine that punishes those who dare to be good. Like Edmond Dantes or Atticus Finch, Mick Murphy embodies a kind of virtue that threatens the status quo, and, as with Dantes, that virtue invites punishment from those in power. Bromden, long silenced by trauma, ultimately finds his voice because someone dared to stand up and pay the price for what was right. Cervantes' line reminds us that true goodness often suffers quietly in the shadow of cruelty, and yet still, it lights the way for others. Speaking of cruelty and suffering, it's important to briefly mention another character who shares the name of Cervantes' titular hero, Donquixote Doflamingo from One Piece. A warlord who manipulates fate and toys with the lives of others, Doflamingo is a twisted reflection of the original Don Quixote. Both are shaped by the weight of their pasts, but while Cervantes' Quixote sees fantasy and strives to do good, Doflamingo sees reality and chooses destruction. "The world is built on lies," he proclaims, claiming insight into the corruption around him. But instead of reforming the world, he exploits its pain. Like a delusional tyrant, he builds a warped ideology where only those who dominate by force are celestial. His name is no accident. Doflamingo is a man broken by his father's ideals, seeking power through chaos, a Don Quixote who replaces windmills with weapons. His Joker persona only deepens the tragedy, a mask for a man who cannot cope with his fall from nobility, yet clings to control at all costs. He becomes a study in narcissistic delusion and a cautionary tale of a villain who might have been a visionary. Whether it's the quiet resistance of Chief Bromden, the deluded tyranny of Doflamingo, or the steadfast dreaming of Don Quixote, each of these figures reminds us that the battle between despair and dignity is never straightforward. The path of integrity is often lonely, and the world rarely rewards those who choose to hope when it would be easier to surrender. But that is precisely where strength is born, not in the absence of hardship, but in the willingness to endure it with courage. Cervantes, ever the sage beneath the satire, gives us a line that could serve as a guiding star through all these stories and more.
It's up to brave hearts to be patient when things are going badly, as well as being happy when they're going well.
It's a calling. It's an invitation to the kind of life Don Quixote chose, not because it made sense, but because it made meaning. To keep hoping when there is no reward. To keep loving when there is no certainty. To keep imagining, especially when the world says not to. We've seen this idea before, again and again, across the stories we've explored. Monkey D. Luffy from One Piece charges forward through loss and loneliness, a smile on his face and scars on his heart. Edmond Dantes waits in silence, shaped by betrayal and darkness, until the moment comes to reclaim his light. Chief Bromden watches virtue suffer and still dares, in the end, to rise. So whether you're a weary sailor in the shadow diff, a quiet patient on a ward ruled by the Combine, a rubber-powered pirate chasing the horizon, or a mad knight tilting at windmills, the truth remains, patience is not weakness. And hope is not foolish, and courage is not always loud. This book is an anthem to brave hearts. To anyone listening who feels out of place in the world, who has ever tilted at their own windmills, this novel is for you. You are not alone. You are not foolish. You are human. And as Quixote shows us, being human means falling and trying again, loving even when you're laughed at, and living according to a dream others might not understand. Don Quixote taught us that there is nobility in dreaming, even when the world calls you mad. That to ride out for justice on a weary old horse with nothing but a bent lance and an overfull heart is perhaps the bravest thing a soul can do. But what happens when the dream shatters? When the windmills give way to war machines? when the lance is replaced by a spear and the battlefield is no longer imaginary? In our next episode, we journey from the dusty roads of La Mancha to the blood-soaked shores of Troy, from the hopeful madness of one man to the collective rage of nations. The gods will descend, heroes will fall, and the oldest questions of honor, pride, and fate will rise again. Join us for Homer's The Iliad, a tale of wrath and glory, loss and longing, and the fire that burns in the heart of every warrior. Until then, remember the words of Don Quixote. Thou hast seen nothing yet. As always, a good journey.